We were gonna try and get sort of interactions with AI from the audience here, but actually it was too technically complicated because we don't actually have a monitor to display your thoughts on. So we're gonna have to do something using actual human creativity, where you put your hands up and I'll call your responses and then I'll synthesize at the end. This panel is around AI and the challenges of AI and human creativity. And I'm joined by a genuinely expert panel, including a panelist that is running up from the back here. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves briefly. Then we're going to kind of go through around 4 different topics, sort of 4 different policy areas that we think policymakers need to consider. We'll also be joined by 2 parliamentarians, although they haven't materialised yet, but they do have a busy schedule. And then I'd like to actually take audience interventions as we go. So if anyone's got like a really pressing short intervention they want to bring to the table while we're talking, stick your hand up. I'll try and bring in as many folks as I can. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. I'll start. I'm Mike Harris. I'm the founder of 89up. We're a communications agency. We work on the world's most complex causes. So one of them is the intersection between technology and democracy and what the parameters for that interaction should be. So Danielle, do you want to go first?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Danielle Dodu. I'm a technologist, a serial founder, and a creator. Spent about 18 years in digital transformation for banks, and also have a media platform and radio show for the Black community, educating them on the news.
Hi everyone, I'm Suhair Khan. I'm also a technologist. I spent most of my career working at Google as a product manager, working with machine learning. I now run an incubator called Open Ended, which is at very much the intersection of the creative industries and emerging technology. And I'm also a university lecturer and involved with multiple cultural institutions in the UK.
Hi, I'm Eliza Easton. I founded and run Skin Analysis, which is a think tank that works on the creative industries. One of the big projects we're doing at the moment is on Createch, so the place where creative industries and technology meet, which will be published by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport in January.
Thank you. Sorry for being late, running from another panel. My name's Tom Adiula. I've spent over 25 years in the startup sector. Most latterly, I founded and ran my own computer vision AI startup in the fashion space. Subsequently, I've invested in a bunch of startups. I co-authored the Labour Startup Scale-Up Review for Rachel Reeves. I sit on the board of the Startup Coalition and a bunch of other boards, including Channel 4.
So we're going to start with the context. What is actually happening? And I want to ask Tom a question. Essentially, what is AI? What do we actually mean when we talk about AI?
I always think that AI is sort of like the sum of all hopes and fears. It's a catch-all term that is everything. We've gone through eras where we've had these terms. What is big data? What is I can't remember the other ones that have gone through, but this time in AI, the difficulty I always find with AI is that it has a projection based on what you think it is, whereas I think that the moment we're in right now is specifically focused on generative AI, and especially the work coming out the likes of OpenAI, the likes of Anthropic, etc., and it's been focused on a big development which happened as a consequence of some work that Google done and some others in how to basically churn through huge volumes of data. Because I think the underlying algorithms about how to create probabilistic models, as in based on something, what do I think would happen next, have existed for quite a long time. But the uniqueness of now is that cloud computing, chips, being able to work faster than ever before, the ability to access and crawl huge sums of data has meant that probabilistic type models have become kind of magical. So what is happening in these models, it's effectively the case of, based on what I've seen before, which for a lot of these models is practically everything, this is what should come next. And that is where we're at the moment. So we've had this revolution in terms of being able to do that, and we're now, I would say, at the foothills of what comes next. We don't really, and we haven't really entered the products and services stage of how do we take this emergence and build it into our workflows and start to see whether it can have a dramatic impact on our lives, both from a productivity level and the art of the possible.
So, Peter, should we just say hello, and do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Hello, yes. Sorry I'm a bit late. I was rushing over from another panel. I'm Peter Swallow. I'm the new MP for Bracknell.
Thank you. Danielle, how are creatives using AI right now?
So can I just try and simplify the answer to the AA question?
Go on.
Okay. So we can generally think of AI as systems that mimic human intelligence. So you've got the processing of data, you've got the learning from that data, and then the making decisions from that data. And from a technology perspective, it's generally made up of machine learning capabilities, so large language models, LLMs, and then you've got natural language processing, so NLP, such as utilize neural networks, and then you've got computer vision, which is image recognition. So that's it from the technical, but I love the philosophical understanding of it as well. And from a creator's perspective, in answer to your question, I see it as a co-collaborator. I see it as a tool to be able to enhance our natural human ingenuity and automate and get rid of the more mundane tasks and allow us to kind of like expand our imagination.
Nice. And how are you personally using it right now? Like, what sort of things are you experimenting with?
So within the show that we have, the podcast that we run, we use it for a lot of editing. For clipping up content, for putting subtitles on there. It also helps us to analyze our audience. And I'm personally using it for music creation, for story writing, and for some elements of streamlining advertising with regards to the startup. But can I also not just hog the mic for a second? I think when we talk about the creative industries and the creator economy, they're two very distinctive groups, and I think people use them interchangeably. So for me, the creative industries are the more traditional sectors such as advertising, film, music, etc. And then you've got the creator economy, which is individuals like myself and many others who use platforms like TikTok and YouTube, etc., to create independent content that doesn't necessarily have the gatekeeping qualities of these kind of more traditional institutions.
Brilliant. I think this is a very good opportunity now to introduce the minister who will be responsible for these two policy areas of AI and the creative industries.
Oh, in the wrong room.
No.
Not for the first time.
We've started with some light questions such as what is AI from our panel. So, Chris, do you want to introduce yourself, or should we carry on and then we'll bring you in a moment?
I think you should carry on.
Okay, great. So, Suhair.
This is Chris Bryant.
Yes.
Yes, all right, we do need to introduce you. I'm Chris Bryant. I'm a minister in DC and in DCMS. I don't actually have responsibility for AI in DC,
Yes.
but I have responsibility for creative industries in DCMS, so that's
Yes.
an entertaining combination.
Yes. Thank you. So, Suhair, how does the UK compare internationally on AI to some of the other major markets?
So, the UK is actually one of the world's leading countries in AI across the board. There's three components to it. The first is R&D. So the UK, as everybody here knows, is home to some of the world's most important scientific institutions. Alan Turing is from the UK, and multiple scientists in the computer science industry have come out of the UK. The UK has been less successful than countries like the US in value capture from that R&D, but it actually presents an opportunity into the future. In terms of what Tom was referring to in the very beginning, the whole new space of generative AI, there's obviously work to be done. However, the second point I wanted to make is that AI is not just going to be about AI alone. The DIST and various other government departments are already far ahead in terms of their investments in industries like quantum computing, biotechnology, semiconductors. There's been a number of panels actually in that space, climate tech. And so when we think about AI, I think we need to just take a bigger picture approach. And I think it's really important from a policy perspective for the government to recognize the synergies between these industries, but also to think about where that value capture is happening or not happening. And then finally, from a cross-disciplinary perspective, the UK obviously is a leading country in so many ways, in culture, in advertising, in terms of the creator economy, and I think that adds a lot of value to the AI sector beyond pure computing.
Thank you. And I think what's fascinating is I saw a policy report on AI and why the UK is sort of positioned really well, and actually we sometimes forget that pretty much all of the microprocessors in our pockets are designed by ARM, which is just on the outskirts of Cambridge, which is is like the world market leader in chips for sort of low power chips. We now want to go through to what are sort of the existing policies around AI, and specifically what should Labour not do? So Eliza, I'm going to give you the challenge of what should Labour not do in this area?
Yeah, there's probably lots of things. I've sort of put it into some buckets, and they're not very sexily named. I tried to find sexy names for the buckets, but buckets aren't that sexy. So the first bucket is things that mean creatives get paid and copyright isn't infringed. So I think here, there's a bunch of legislative questions which we're kind of playing through at the moment. So we're watching what happens in the EU. It's early days, the different countries are putting in the AI Act. We're going to see what happens there. There's a big court case between Getty Images and the UK company Stability AI, which I think is going to be going sort of public in 2025, the court case, not the company. And I think that will really be an interesting case for how our existing legislative framework holds up to some of the challenges of AI. And if you haven't seen that court case, wait, is anyone here from Stability AI? No, great. If you haven't seen that court case, basically the problem is that all of the images say Getty Images on them because Stability AI used so many Getty Images that all of their images say Getty Images. So, Getty Images suing them. But it's not just the legislative framework.
You mean everybody else can just get away with it?
Well, it's interesting because obviously you've got copyright questions at the input and the output. So you've got, what are they using? So are they using copyright images at all? And then can you visibly see what they used? And that's the example with the Getty Images. So we have to look at the legislative framework across both of those. I absolutely agree. And then you've got kind of the business model problem, which is actually, okay, if we want to start paying people, what's the business model going to look like? And I always think about, when people were illegally downloading music, and actually the introduction of Spotify. Again, is anyone here from Spotify? Great. So the introduction of Spotify provided, albeit a flawed, but a genuine business model by which people could be paid for their music being streamed. Then you've got infrastructural policy. So you've got stuff like, is UKRI spending enough on the creative industries? At the moment, it's less than 1%. Let's at least double that. The creative industries are 6% of the economy. Even if you take out IT and software, it's still way above what UKRI is spending. And I really liked what you said. It's not just about AI. It's robotics, it's quantum, it's technologies in general. We are massively under investing in these areas, and that's where we're going to see big growth. We need, I think, Tom, you like to talk about like a playground for createch policies. Where's the creative tech catapult? Let's really invest in this stuff, get excited, get playful, and allow creators in to get playful. And then there's a bunch of skills questions, and that goes back to, the piece we're doing, so we're publishing this piece for DCMS in January, and actually I've been shocked by how many people are saying, the createch skills, they're important, but it's actually getting creative confidence for people at primary school, at secondary school that we're really missing, and that's been as a result of ongoing cuts to arts education. So it's, to me, very surprising how much technologists are saying we're missing arts education, but I think that's very important to say. But of course there are also things we can do at HE and FE. So those are my buckets, my sexy buckets.
They sound very sexy and very bucket-like. Chris, would you like to sort of, when you're thinking about this with your brief on the creative industries, obviously sitting across two big departments, so how are you thinking or grappling with some of these issues? What do you think some of the challenges are?
Well, I think the first question was what should Labour not do, and I think in the words of RuPaul, it's basically don't fuck it up, which will be easy to do. It will be easy to do either by not engaging sufficiently, or by engaging with a rather heavy-handed foot. Metaphor went wrong there. And so, I'm not convinced that waiting for civil actions to troll their way through, for which, I mean, I've seen the Getty Images case, and it's not just here, it's in the US as well, and I know there are lots of administrations that are kind of sitting waiting to look how that's going to end up, but that might not end until 2028, 2029, and then the future's sold. So I'm not sure that just waiting for that to happen is going to do the work. Incidentally, what is quite interesting is that there's not been a row about jurisdiction in that case, which is intriguing in itself, I think. Now, my kind of instinct, I have two sets of instincts. One is innovation is essential to creativity and to the creative industries. And in fact, the creative industries have been using various different forms of artificial intelligence. I mean, we shouldn't conflate all different kinds of artificial intelligence into one, but I'm going to. But broadly speaking, What is sampling if it isn't?
That one's dead.
What is sampling if it isn't a form of using artificial intelligence in music, and having the bossa nova playing on your keyboard and all the rest of it? So I don't think that the creative industry should be terrified of artificial intelligence in that sense. But at the same time, you do have to have some form of remunerative system, because otherwise you won't have any human-based creativity monetized into the future. So that's the kind of thing that we've got to square. I've looked at the EU Act, obviously. I mean, I don't think I'm breaking confidence to say that several people in the EU have said to me, well, the aim of the EU Act was to lead to more collective licensing, and it hasn't. So it may be that the EU Act system isn't the right thing for them, and it may end up being changed when there's a new commission formed. And it may be that we need, if we're going to look at something, we need to look at something which is a very different from what the EU have done. In the end, the single most important thing for us, because we do want to be a leader in AI in the UK, we want, AI companies have said to us very, very clearly that they are operating with no legal certainty in the UK at the moment, and that is problematic for them. So we want them to be able to proceed with legal certainty. The previous government tried to have a voluntary code between two sets of people who were throwing spears at each other, and that didn't really work, funnily enough. So we do want to work at pace in this space, but we're not wedded to anything as yet. We're working on it.
Thank you. One thing that
I hope I managed not to say anything very charmingly there.
Coming back to you. One thing that's interesting is the FCA obviously have the sandbox where you can sort of like experiment within a sort of defined,
Sorry, I should have said one other of the buckets that was really important is about UKRI and R&D and for the creative industries. Extremely well extremely well made, and Patrick Vallance and I have talked about this at length already. That it's as much an issue for UKRI as it is a matter for the creative industries themselves. But there's also an issue about how do you get finance into creative industries, and some of the work that the Treasury is doing, I think, on pension funds may find a new route for people to take a bit more interest in the creative industries and finding finance so that you don't have this cliff edge once you've been up and going for 2 or 3 years and then suddenly everything falls apart. And incidentally, I would say that tech is a creative industry. They're not two completely separate worlds.
So I'm going to bring in someone from the audience, and then we're going to move on to creativity, and Peter's going to sort of elaborate on what needs to happen in terms of access to education and skills. But first, Jonathan Hayward.
Sorry, it's not that.
Be loud.
Haven't we all?
Amazing. Creativity and tech. Jonathan Hayward, Public Interest News Foundation. So Chris, I really take your point about pace. So as you remember, one of the last things the last government did was to get through the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act,
yes.
which your DCIT department is now responsible for. Competition and Markets Authority haven't yet got their powers under that act. I think that's subject to a commencement order. They've indicated they're going to go quite slowly and carefully about designating big tech platforms to regulate, designing conduct requirements on them. As and when they've done all that, there is actually a regulatory framework within which creators, news providers, retailers, small tech, everyone in the economy who has a relationship with big tech can actually sit at a table and negotiate with them and come to some of those new licensing arrangements. But are you convinced that the speed of that process is good enough?
Shall I just answer that?
Yes, thank you.
I've made it very clear that speed is of the essence.
Thank you. Peter, so we're now going to talk about creativity. We're going to run through a few points on creativity, but in terms of what do you think needs to happen in terms of access to education skills in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be reinventing the wheel when I say that obviously it's important that we're skilling up our workforce for the future in all of the skills that they need to access and use AI. That is absolutely important. You know, the previous government spoke at length about wanting to make sure that, you know, there was lots of stuff going on in terms of education for STEM, and that is important. What I would say though, and my challenge to that has always been, well, if AI is going to revolutionise the workforce or even just change it substantially, as it looks like it may well do, then what skills isn't it going to be able to take on? So for context, before I became an MP, I was a humanities teacher and lecturer. I taught classics, and the skills that I try to empower my students with, empathy, resilience, the ability to analyse on a human level the text placed before them, they are skills that AI is never going to be able to replicate. So if we are thinking what the workforce of tomorrow is going to look like, it's going to look much more like those soft human skills that aren't going to be able to be replicated. And actually I think that's both the challenge and the opportunity when it comes to creative sectors working with AI. AI is not going to be able to replace everything or the spark of human creativity. You talked about co-creating with AI. I think that's absolutely on the money. So yeah, we absolutely have to skill people up to be able to use these tools, but also to use them in a way that is additive on both sides.
Brilliant. Peter, there's a weird tapping noise. Peter, I'm going to bring you in at the end. I really want to ask you a question. How would Greek philosophers have tackled the interaction between humans and an AI? And I think I'm going to pose that to you at the end.
Thank you for giving me time to think of it.
Yeah, I thought I'd give you a little bit of time with that.
Just sat on top of a pillar.
or in a barrel. So we're going to talk now about social mobility. We're going to talk about class and race. And does AI offer us any opportunities in this space? We know that the creative sector is one where we want to promote greater diversity, and there have been a glass ceiling for many people. What did you think of some of the opportunities and challenges when it comes to AI in this sector?
So if we kind of come back to the policy question, I think if we want to be a leader in the space, it needs to be equitable, and that starts from policy, I believe. I think we need inclusive policies and diverse data sets. Those are the two key things. And it's not just about governmental policy. I mean, we can implement things like auditing or making sure that there are advisory boards on specific tech companies, etc. But it also comes down to individuals and agencies and smaller companies who are using open source models, making sure that they are hiring diverse developers, that they are, and this again comes down to governmental policy, making sure that there is some kind of an audit system that they can show they're transparent, be transparent with their data sets. And I think without that, we're not going to be able to compete on a global stage because it is a hindrance. I think whilst AI can help democratize the creator and potentially the creative industry by removing some of those gateways and allowing access to the tools, there are still issues around who can afford those tools, who can afford the subscription for those tools, who has the money to buy the laptops and the equipment to be able to utilize those tools. So it's not just about implementing and co-collaborating human ingenuity with tech. It's about giving access to the tech so that you can leverage it. I think with the bias question and the kind of inequality and stereotypical data, it is a huge issue. I'm finding that personally myself. It not only perpetuates stereotypes, but it also hinders the monetization of your content. So, for example, if you are a person of color and you want to create content, whether it's advertising or something educational, and use black images, it often puts those stereotypical tropes in, or women with big hooped earrings, for example, in every image. So when the whole point of kind of creativity is to be authentic, it's really hard to reach an audience when you're unable to be authentic with the content that you're creating. So I do believe that AI can definitely level the playing field, but there is a long way to go to make sure that the systems and the data is representative. Yeah.
I mean, AI will, by definition, reprogram itself based on the sum total of human experience, which includes, massively problematic issues. We're now going to talk about AI and the impact on the concentration of the UK creative industry. So we're going to talk about place. So Eliza, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think those points on skills were so well made. And I think in general, we're seeing the creative industries become more and more of a superstar economy, as economists say, or a winner-takes-all economy. A few people are making more and more of the money. I think there's a risk that AI might accelerate that. I think there's a risk that those entry-level jobs are going, which can be great if you're running a small digital agency and you don't have all of the staff. You can actually pitch for stuff you never would have been able to pitch for before, but actually not having entry-level jobs can restrict some of those people who need that first experience and don't have access to the creative industries, which is this hyper networked sector with lots of freelancers. And the problems there when it comes to place as well. I mean, people thought in the pandemic what we were going to see was a declustering of the creative industries, people moving further away, but I think actually often networks have tightened, including in place. Both the AI sector and the creative industry sector are very, very tightly clustered. And although there's some of the most exciting creative industries clusters outside of London, London's still making over half of the GVA of the creative industries. And so actually, moving that wealth around the country, moving opportunity around the country might seem to be made easier by technological innovation in general, including AI, but I would really say we need to focus on lifelong skills, all of the classic things that aren't just about the creative industries, to make sure that things are spread and that people can get opportunities, across the country and coming from all kinds of different backgrounds.
So this person here just wants to come in on this point.
You could come to the front if you wanted.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. My name's Rima. I'm from DAX, Design Artists Copyright Society. We represent 150,000 visual artists all over the world, from photographers, fine artists, and so on. AI is obviously a really big question for them. And one thing about skills that I really wanted to talk about was the impact that a lack of skills is having on artists and creators who are already in their career. So we've talked quite a bit about sort of access to education from younger and higher education. I think there's some amazing courses at universities like Creative Computing Institute, UAL. But what happens to creators once they're already trained, once they've already done their kind of photography skills courses back 10 years ago? How are they able to access sort of the digital training that can get them into fields like AI?
Thank you. Can we have someone that isn't a minister doing the mics? I'm happy to do it. So we are now going to move on to the future of work. And
Can I just say something about DAX?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think one of the great things that we did in the Labour government was we ended up creating the artist resale right, and there are other countries like Canada that still don't have one. There are here, but they might be about to introduce one in Canada. And it's really important that we need to bear in mind that one of the things that the UK does extraordinarily well is the creative industries. What we sell is IP. It's our creativity and our intellectual property. And actually, the copyright regime as an international, the history of copyright, has been one of the most successful international treaties of all. And that whole process has been really important. So I want us to seize hold of all the opportunities of AI, but I don't want us to surrender our opportunity to be paid. And just in relation to Spotify, I don't stream music, I buy music because I want people who've made this stuff in the first place to get the reward from it.
Can I jump in there briefly as well? So, hi there, Rima. I actually live 150 metres away from your office, funny enough. On the skills front, I think the bit that we sort of need to remember at this moment in time is that we're still at the foothills where the underlying infrastructure is changing at such a rapid pace that it hasn't got to a point of settling. So it feels like everybody's trying to learn something new all the time, because actually there is something new all the time. So I almost think that this moment is the experimentation moment for the people who have a lot of time in their hands. I feel like I'm not even at the cutting edge because I don't have the time to basically keep up with what is new. But it will settle at a point in time, and then we'll start to have products and services. And the way I feel about this tech cycle is that if you go through each from the emergence of software, the emergence of the internet, the emergence of apps, at each point in the juncture, the ability to create like proper consumer services and products has become cheaper, faster, and required less dedicated resources. So I think in this AI era, the actual opportunity is potentially like vast from the perspective of, I don't think anybody's going to need to code. I don't think my children are going to need to code. Yeah. I think it's going to be a more intuitive, problem-solving based skill, thought-based mindset that you'll need to have, and it's all about imagining what you want to try and solve. So I think the opportunity here is certainly at the edge for us to basically switch to a sense of, and it would be really interesting and potentially open up diverse spaces where we talk about challenges of like, here's a challenge, who's open, willing, motivated to try and go out and solve them. And it could be a man in a shed through to a company, attack it and try and solve it. So I think that's the potential sort of prize that's available at the end of this, and that's a bit that excites me. And consequently, I think if we think from the R&D perspective, there's some like policy challenges along that way, because currently a developer you can amortize as capex, but there won't be developers. So how are we going to think about those sort of specific policy-based challenges?
So I think we're going to come back to, we've got a good amount of time for questions actually from the floor, so we're going to come back to the future of work and what the job market looks like. My next door neighbour, Bar One, he's got 3 PhDs in maths and he's a world expert on the actual development of AI. I saw him, we were walking through the park, and I saw him, he looked very concerned. I said, what are you concerned about? He said, what job will my son do? The robots are coming, what job will my son do? What jobs are there that AI cannot automate or reduce? So he was thinking his son could be a developer. Well, developers actually already, the developers that I work with are using AI to give them snippets of code, and it requires a single person to basically audit the code. But this is just happening faster and faster and faster. So we'll come back to this. Suhair, does AI mean that we can all be more creative at work?
So I'm going to come back to the point you wanted to go over, which is that I think we have to accept that there's going to be a shift in the creative sector in terms of jobs, in terms of skills required, in terms of the idea of what human creativity is. We can go back to being philosophical, but I think that AI is going to present philosophical challenges. I mean, if you think about what it means for a bot to make a song using AI, I don't know how many people have listened to an AI-generated song knowingly. There was a viral song by Drake and The Weeknd. It was a collaboration, went viral last year, and there was no legal recourse for either of them. They didn't know what to do about it. So if you think about a song like that that's only listened to by bots, then who made it? Who monetizes it? Who owns it? There's so many questions that we're going to have to grapple with that governments are already considering, and those are legal issues. But from a creative perspective, the idea of of course, ambition, desire, feeling, as you said. Of course, that's going to be very much human, but I think the creative sector is going to change, and we're going to have to come to terms with that. Movies will change, music will change, production is going to change, and that doesn't mean that the role of artists is going to disappear. Maybe artists will be continuing to do the work that they already did. It's a different space. They will be curators, but most importantly, it's about critical thinking. It's about the perspective that an artist brings, that each of us brings to this room, your ability to question the world around you, to question yourself, and I think that's where the creative industries and the cultural sector are going to matter more than ever in this era of AI. And again, like to my earlier point, we're getting stuck at AI, I think, in so many of these conversations. There's so much more innovation and science that's yet to come, and the idea of human imagination is certainly going to continue to evolve. But I think when we think about what happens next? Can you be creative at work? Of course, you can all make songs and do cool snippets and make better websites and better presentations. But I think more deeply, and the UK has a huge competitive advantage here actually, which is fantastic, is that there is a creative sector here, there is a cultural ecosystem, and there's also a desire to sustain that and to connect that. And so as from a policy recommendation, what I think the Labour government should not do is tons of more conferences and summits, because there's already a space for geopolitical flexing, I think, for the UK now with AI. I think it's a lot more about targeted investment and exactly what you said, Minister, is translating the R&D into actual value capture, which I think we're at the edge of right now.
Can I we agreed on this panel when we met beforehand that we would let ourselves disagree. And I guess I slightly disagree on the summit point, because I think talking about what this government shouldn't do, and I think really haven't been doing, but the previous government certainly did do, was exclude these conversations about creative industries from the kind of big conversation about AI. And when there was an AI conference, there was really nothing on the creative industries. And actually, I think the UK sits really interestingly between the US and the EU on these issues. And I think we have a real chance to bring together a global conversation around much more niche than sort of our general thing on AI. Of course, there's always going to be a focus on security, and that's what happened at the UK's AI kind of global conference. But I do think if there are going to be more conferences, as you say, some really thoughtful ones which take this specific issue further, I think would be useful.
I don't know what geopolitical flexing looks like. I've got kind of Jean-Claude Van Damme going through my head. See, I suspect that the US is going to move. I mean, it depends. Obviously, there's some events going on over there in a few weeks' time. But actually, whatever the administration is, I'm not quite sure where they'll end up. They've done some things which the EU hasn't done. The EU, I think, is going to have another look at what it's done already. I had a really interesting conversation. This isn't about creative industries, but it is about AI. I had a really interesting conversation with people who've developed apps, AI-based apps for cognitive behavioural therapy, which are being prescribed now by the NHS in many cases. And they said they're brilliant, they're really, really useful, they can bring significant difference to people's mental health. However, you get 85% of the way, and then you want a human being.
Yes.
Now, we may be able to get to a place where it's 90% or 92%, but you'll still be the moment where you want the actual human being. And I think that's that bit of creativity. You could probably make a Bridget Riley online, but it wouldn't be a Bridget Riley, because it wouldn't have that personal human-to-human connection in the end. And I think that's the bit that we've still got to manage to hold on to. And yeah, I don't mind going into a bookshop and buying a book that has been written by AI, as long as it says on the cover, created by AI, not Barbara Cartland. They might have, you could argue.
AI could never replace Barbara Cartland.
She was really beautiful in the 1930s.
Do you want to come back on any of these points, the geopolitical flex? Because I think it's an interesting point about how different jurisdictions are looking at this, and where does the UK sit?
Well, so on the conferencing, obviously the creative industry should be part of any conversation. In terms of geopolitical effects, I think that distractions in terms of bringing together world leaders and the heads of every AI company into having more conversations on AI regulation isn't necessarily going to benefit the UK's ecosystem. It will bring interest, and of course, I just think that the UK has a role to play as an English language speaking country actually in the world of AI, which is all English language speaking. Yeah. And as I said, with all of these institutions in one place, in terms of geopolitical flex, I think there's so much to be said for what Eliza talks about, which is soft power and exporting what the UK represents to the rest of the world. And secondly, in terms of attracting more scientists, more research, more input. I've been in several interesting conversations here on the life sciences where there's concerns about scientists leaving, issues with visas, issues with trade, import. That's what I mean, re-establishing the UK as a center for scientific research, but also in the space of computer science, in the space of machine learning and AI, where many of us go to the US to begin and end our careers, to have people not leaving Cambridge or Imperial to get a job in Silicon Valley, but to be here and to build technology with the values that a multicultural, very diverse and evolving country actually should represent.
Suhair's absolutely right. I completely agree with all of that. I'm not going to say we're not going to have another summit because, for all I know, one will be announced later on.
We'll be there.
But actually, I think what needs to happen is a bit of a kind of granular discussion between. I think we in the UK could offer leadership. Copyright, it's quite a kind of somewhere between Britain and France is kind of where we ended up with copyright, really, isn't it?
Yes.
And so you could end up with a really good leadership in this sphere, I think. But we probably need to have specific conversations with a lot of people who have very different understandings of what copyright looks like and intellectual property and all the rest of it. But I would also say, that a lot of tech companies, of course, and AI companies, they have IP issues of their own. I think we could provide leadership without flexing.
So I want to bring Peter, and then I want to take some sort of interactions from the floor, and then I think we've got a little bit of time left.
Okay. Your profound philosophy. So Aristotle was a teleologist, which means he defined things by their endpoint, not the process by which they were created. And I think that's the sort of the traditional model for appreciating creativity, right? So whether it's your Monet or your Barbara Castle, you appreciate the end product, not necessarily the process of creation. I think for a long time now, for the last couple of decades, the creative industry has been trying to get to a point where we appreciate the process of creation as part of the art form, and that's been really effective and powerful and innovative. But I think the challenge of AI being introduced into the creative industries has to speed that up, because exactly as you say, Chris, when you get to a point where the end product might look, at least to an untrained eye, very similar, whether it's AI generated or human generated, then that process becomes much more important in terms of appreciating the creative process. So my philosophy corner point is Aristotle was wrong about AI.
You heard it here first. Tom, did you want to just quickly jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to. Sorry to come back to the summit point as well. I think you should always be concerned and worried when big companies are calling for regulation. Yeah. So that we should remain healthily super skeptical and cynical in all of these summits about being driven down a track which ends up basically embedding incumbency and embedding value capture from major companies over infrastructure that they will only be able to afford. Because I think one of the big sort of hidden secrets, if you like, or secrets out in the open of this AI point is that apart from just raw cash, there doesn't seem to be a moat. So this is an opportunity for creators to get a higher proportion of the value capture that they potentially feel that they might have lost in the last era from the likes of Spotify and other platforms where they're basically takers and don't feel that they have a direct relationship with their audience to be able to take what should be their share. So that's part that we should think about really strongly and thus I think really enable experimentation at the edge and make sure that we create that thriving ecosystem for people to experiment quite freely in the way that you might think of Section 230 in the US enabled the likes of Google, etc., to really sort of play quite hard and experiment until they reach the point of scale.
So who would like to make an interview? Oh, wow, brilliant. So we've got 3 hands here. Any other takers? No? We'll go with these 3 gentlemen. Oh, sorry, there's someone at the back. Yes. So we'll go for this gentleman, then person in the back, and then we'll go round here.
Hi, Mike Gooding from Condé Nast, the digital first publisher. We're having intense conversations about how to use AI internally for productivity, creativity. I'd like to ask the panel, at what point do you declare that you've used AI? How do you declare it? And what do you declare?
Is it the same question from... Yeah.
Yes, I'm Bill Mansfield. I've just set up a startup which is AI specifically for the creative sector, and it appears I'm a very unusual person in that I've won UKRI funding through Innovate UK, jointly with DCMS, and I'm not in London. I'm doing it out. So it's leonardopower.com, for those that might be interested. So our form of AI is to help creatives, not with their creativity, it's to save them time and enable them to be more successful as creative enterprises. That's what we do. So my question would be, is enough thought being put into the application of AI to help access to business tools effectively, to be more successful and to address issues like the huge rate of neurodivergence, for example, in the creative sector?
Yeah, right. Can we take take one at the back?
Can I answer the first question before we forget what the questions are? So I think authenticity and transparency are really important. The way I've been doing it personally is stating that I prompted something and that the algorithm generated X, Y, and Z, but I think you can put it in your terms and conditions, in your privacy policy. I think reputationally it's really important to call out when you've been using AI, because there are now algorithms out there checking and also tagging AI-generated gen content. So rather than be caught out and embarrassed, it's better that you put your hand up first.
And if I might, I mean, maybe at Tory Party conference next week they should all have to announce whether their speech was written by ChatGPT beforehand. No, serious point, which is I think we do. I was serious point earlier, which is not all AI is the same. So I think every GP probably in 2 or 3 years' time will have an AI assistant on their screen, which will say after you've had a patient in talking about IBS, will say, you've been talking about IBS, would you like to prescribe omeprazole or whatever, and if so, is it 1 pill a day or 4 pills a day or whatever, and that will be an enormous saving of time and energy. I don't think anybody objects to that. It's where it's sort of replaced the humanity. That's the bit that we've got to tackle.
And I'd say as well, I think like obviously if anyone's Googled anything now, unless you cover your eyes with the bit at the top, you've used AI because it's using AI. But I think this is where government guidelines around transparency can be incredibly useful, because actually you're right, it's really difficult, especially with small companies, to work out what they're supposed to say. And some people using AI and don't know they're using it. They're using Adobe software and have no idea that the nice new feature that they're clicking is using AI. So I do think there's a real place for fast-moving government, specifically on the issue of transparency. I think I'm excited to see here. I'm hopeful there's going to be fast movement on that.
We've had a lot of conversation about public sector workers complaining about bureaucracy, form filling, paperwork. This is an amazing opportunity to free public sector open to the job that they intended to do. There's a person at the back who'd like to speak. There's 2 people here, so.
Hello, I will stand up because I'm at the back. Hi everyone, thank you so much for a fantastic panel so far. My name is Vicky Williams. I am from the CoStar Network, which is the UK's R&D network for creative tech. We are to date the biggest investment in the creative industries from UKRI, so really brilliant to be here and part of this conversation. This is a conversation actually building from a conversation Eliza and I were both in earlier, or last week, I think, around the role the creative industries have in sustainability policy as well, especially when it comes to AI. We've seen some fantastic investments from DESNES around AI for decarbonisation. But my question was, with AI and the reliability on compute power and the sustainability challenges that come with that, how do we ensure the creative industries are inserted firmly into sustainability policy and aligning across different departments to make sure that the creative industries are really part of that picture. Thank you.
And we'll quickly take the intervention here, and I know you're coming, but I'll let the panel come in first. Sorry, sir.
Hello, my name's Onela Kangam from the Music Publishers Association. Just a point around the outputs. I was in LA last week speaking to music supervisors from Warner Brothers, Netflix, Disney, and Riot Games, huge game studio out there. And I was pleasantly surprised that a lot of the music supervisors said that they would not be using AI, that they are very much championing still human creativity, and that AI just does not compare. So in terms of like composition score and just even library music, they're very much still committed to using human creativity. But my question was around the input, and is there ever a way that creators and rights holders could safeguard their copyright against unfair, unpermitted ingestion? Because of course in the EU AI Act there's an opt-out, but there doesn't seem to be any mechanism for creators or right holders to really enforce that. So just interested from the panel in terms of what do you think what are the possible solutions?
So who would like to chip in? Chris? Yep.
So sustainability, absolutely. I mean, there's been some really good work done by the theatres. The theatre book is really good, but lots of theatres are buildings, and lots of arts buildings in the UK are find it very difficult to be sustainable. Even incandescent lighting is an issue in Parliament, for instance. So we know we've got to address that, and that's one of the key things we're trying to drive through in DCMS. On the issue about opt-out, I mean, one of the things is that I get this term wrong. There's something robots protocol. So you as an artist can say, please don't ingest my works, but the process of that means that you're completely wiped from the internet, which is probably not what you want. I think we've got to get to a place where this works, and it doesn't work at the moment.
So I think that this is really speaking to Danielle's points on responsible AI. So first is, of course, in terms of sustainability, it goes far beyond just the creative industries. There's a lack of disclosure right now on just the vast amount of carbon emissions and water evaporation that comes from every single time any of us uses generative AI for any kind of search. And I think for that, government is actually going to play a huge role, hopefully, because it's off the charts now and it's immeasurable. And I know in the US they've gone from a balance in terms of energy produced and consumed to a disconnect and a deficit because of generative AI specifically. On the issue of the rights of artists and data, there's consent, which you've alluded to, which I think is right now a huge problem because it's difficult to measure consent, and I think that opt-in, opt-out framework will probably make a difference. The second is the actual data supply chain, which a lot of technology companies are trying to build interventions on to really think about where data comes from, where it ends up, and if it's possible to have some kind of attribution that's technology generated, as you said. So for artists to get ahead, of course, you say if you've used something, but that will probably take some time and probably never be resolved, because especially when you look at a multimodal, multimedia landscape where you have audio, video, images, somehow all combined into an end output, it's going to become harder and harder to measure attribution at the end of it. And I think all tech companies are struggling right now, or not disclosing what their plans are. And finally, there's context. So just remember, when you have bias, gender bias, for example, is not just your gender, it's intersectional. It's about context, it's about what we look like, where we come from. We had a conversation on this when we came into the room, and that is something that, again, is not just about how good an AI can become. Eventually algorithms will become better and smarter. It's again about the data that goes in and the data that comes out. It's really complicated, and I don't know if we're going to have a perfect solution at any time soon. Maybe other people on this panel know of actual solutions, but the intersectional element of it is really relevant to this conference, everyone in this room, and it's going to affect us probably in negative ways in the short run.
Very quickly, and then we have to wrap. And this gentleman wants to come in, but he might have to make his point outside.
So sustainability. So I think fashion is responsible for 8 to 10% of global pollution. The UK is the engine room around a lot of the creative industries, but the way that emissions are measured, we don't actually make a lot of the stuff here, so it doesn't look like we're responsible for the emissions, but we're responsible for loads of them. And actually we can do loads because we make the stuff, we design the stuff here. So actually, I completely agree. We need to get research funding around sustainability efforts, including some really interesting stuff happening with AI in fashion, outside of AHRC, get the other research councils to be investing in this as an area, and that's all to Chris's point about setting a target across UKRI and really recognising there's stuff we can do about this. To other points, there's just always going to be artisanship. So the Industrial Revolution, I'm obsessive about William Morris and John Ruskin. You don't lose artisanship. It's still going to be there, but there's challenges to it. And there were challenges of the Industrial Revolution, there's challenges of this one too.
And I'm going to be very rude. I'm going to say two sentences about serendipity, which was, oddly enough, a word first coined by a British MP, which is my worry about algorithms is that we end up being catered to, and we only ever see the things that the algorithm expects us to want to see, rather than being exposed to something different. One of the great things about the creative industries is that they enable you to walk in somebody else's shoes. We won't be a better country in 5 years' time if everybody has just retreated into their small corner.
This gentleman's going to make a final point. We're going to thank the panel. Last note.
Well, thank you, panel. It's a very good question from my wife, actually, who's Barbara Hope Steinberg, who's a visual artist, and her question is, are we going to see AI-generated Jackson Pollocks and Lee Krausers in the future, or is that a no-go area?
They're here now. They're here now. You can do that right now. So I'd like to thank the panel very much. Thanks very much for your interactions. Thank you.